What's one truth you wish you'd said out loud when you were younger?
You know those relentless days when the weight of everything from endless client demands to the quiet ache of single parenting builds up inside you until your body finally rebels in the most dramatic way possible, collapsing right there at your desk amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant ring of office phones, which is exactly what happened to me, Emily Harper. A 42-year-old marketing executive grinding away in the bustling open-plan office of Harper Marketing Associates in downtown Chicago, where I had been staring at my computer screen for hours, typing furiously through the final revisions of a high-stakes pitch deck that could secure a major account and finally give me some breathing room in my budget-strapped life, only for my vision to suddenly blur and my chest to tighten like a vice grip forged from all the stress I'd been ignoring for months, leading to me slumping forward onto the keyboard with a clatter that drew shocked gasps from my coworkers who immediately sprang into action, dialing 911 while someone propped up my head and fanned me with a stack of reports, the world fading into a hazy swirl of sirens and concerned voices before everything went black. When consciousness trickled back hours later, I found myself in a sterile hospital room at Northwestern Memorial, surrounded by the steady beeps of heart monitors and the faint scent of antiseptic that clung to everything, with a kind-faced nurse named Carla standing by my bedside explaining in gentle tones how the paramedics had rushed me in after diagnosing severe dehydration compounded by stress-induced arrhythmia, a condition they attributed to my punishing work schedule and lack of self-care. And since my emergency contact information in my wallet still listed my parents' outdated landline from our old family home in the suburbs of Naperville, the doctors had followed protocol by reaching out to them directly, hoping for some familial support during what could have been a far more serious episode, to which I nodded weakly from the pillows, my throat dry and voice raspy as I mentioned offhand that I hadn't had a real conversation with them in months beyond the bare minimum of holiday greetings and obligatory updates about my 8-year-old son Jake's latest school achievements, figuring deep down that perhaps this health scare might finally prompt the kind of wake-up call our fractured family dynamics desperately needed after years of me playing the role of the dependable daughter who held everything together without ever receiving the same in return. As the afternoon wore on with a parade of medical tests, for fluids dripping steadily into my arm to replenish what my body had lost, and doctors popping in to discuss my recovery plan that involved at least a few days of bed rest and strict limitations on returning to work, my mind wandered through the foggy haze of pain medication to the circumstances that had led me to this point, reflecting on how I'd been pushing through 60-hour weeks at the agency just to cover the costs of daycare for Jake, while scraping by on sporadic alimony payments from my ex-husband who had moved on to a new life shortly after our divorce 5 years ago, leaving me to navigate the dual storms of corporate ambition and motherhood alone in a city that never slowed down. And I even managed a horse chuckle to Carla when she brought in a tray of bland hospital jello, joking that at least my family commitment was now reduced to fruit-flavored gelatin since they hadn't bothered to rush to my side despite the urgent call. By the time evening settled over the room with the city lights twinkling faintly through the half-drawn blinds, boredom had set in amidst the monotony of channel surfing on the mounted TV, so against the doctor's earlier advice to conserve energy and rest, I reached for my phone on the side table, its battery surprisingly still holding a charge after the ordeal, and began scrolling through notifications that had accumulated during my blackout, only to stumble upon a Facebook alert that hit me like an unexpected downpour on a supposedly clear day. Pulling up my younger sister Sarah's profile where she had posted a seemingly innocuous photo of herself flanked by our parents, Mom and Dad, all of them beaming with forced cheer in what appeared to be the familiar backyard of the Naperville house, complete with the old Weber grill and string lights, under the caption "Family Day Without the Drama," a phrase that sliced through me sharper than any scalpel because it directly mocked the very crisis that had landed me here, hooked up to machines and fighting off waves of fatigue. As if my collapse at work was merely an inconvenient blip to be sidestepped for their picture-perfect weekend gathering, and scrolling further, I saw the flood of comments from their social circle, old neighbors, distant cousins, and Sarah's cadre of online friends, lavishing praise on the positive energy, and wholesome vibes, with not a single acknowledgement of my situation, reducing our shared bloodline to a performative facade that erased my existence in their hour of supposed unity. Staring at the image on the screen, a bitter laugh bubbled up from my chest despite the lingering soreness, because this was classic Sarah, the same sibling who had always thrived on turning personal hardships into social media gold. Ever since our high school days when she would borrow my clothes without asking and then post outfit of the day selfies that garnered all the attention, or more recently when she hit me up last year for a quick loan to fund her latest entrepreneurial venture in handmade jewelry that fizzled out faster than a sparkler on the 4th of July, only to vanish into radio silence when the repayment deadline loomed. Always positioning herself as the charming underdog in our ongoing sibling tension that traced back to her stealing my prom date for a laugh back in the 90s, and now here she was, leveraging my near-death experience as the punchline to her narrative of family bliss, making me question if Mom had even paused before striking that pose, her smile as polished as the pearls she wore to church every Sunday. Or if Dad had cracked one of his dad jokes to lighten the mood while I lay vulnerable in this bed miles away. In that moment, a surge of resentment simmered beneath the surface, hot and insistent like the steam from a fresh pot of coffee in the office break room, tempting me to fire off a pointed comment right there in the thread to shatter their illusion for all 200 of their followers to see. But the physical weakness from the ordeal kept me pinned down, my fingers trembling slightly on the device. So instead, I simply closed the app, set the phone aside, and closed my eyes against the sting of unshed tears, allowing the hurt to fester quietly as I pondered the deeper patterns of neglect that had defined our relationships for so long, until the next morning broke with the routine clatter of breakfast trays and nurse rounds, my phone vibrating insistently from its spot on the table, drawing my attention back to a screen now cluttered with unread alerts. 65 missed calls lighting up from familiar numbers, the home landline, Sarah's mobile, even a few from an old cell Dad used for shop business, and a cluster of voicemails waiting to be heard, each one pulling me inexorably toward the confrontation I had hoped to avoid, the weight of their sudden urgency clashing with the fresh betrayal and leaving me frozen in place, heart pounding anew as I debated whether to dive back into the fray or let the silence stretch just a little longer. Those 65 missed calls stacked up on my phone screen like unpaid parking tickets accumulating after a wild night out in the city, each one a digital echo of the family chaos I had long tried to distance myself from while lying there in the dim glow of the hospital room light that cast long shadows across the beige walls and medical charts, and I let them linger unanswered for hours, my thumb hovering indecisively over the play button for the voicemails as if touching it might summon the very neglect that had landed me here in the first place, before finally deciding to hit speaker on low volume just to gauge the tone without fully committing to a response. Starting with Sarah's messages that came through in her typical whiny cadence laced with feigned concern about why I hadn't picked up during what she vaguely referred to as a family thing, as though her social media stunt of broadcasting our barbecue bliss, without mentioning my collapse, was anything but a deliberate erasure of my existence from their narrative, followed by a couple from the home landline where Mom's voice trembled slightly with what sounded like scripted worry over hearing about my little spell from the doctors, but quickly pivoted to asking if I could swing by the house soon because Dad needed help with some paperwork that couldn't wait, a request that made me roll my eyes toward the ceiling tiles even as a pang of old familiarity tugged at me, reminding me of all the times I'd been the one to swoop in as the problem solver during their endless string of minor crises from the days when Dad's auto repair shop in Naperville first started showing cracks under the weight of his impulsive investments. Listening further, Dad's own voicemails cut in with his gruff, no-nonsense baritone barking about the urgency of getting in touch, because there was business to discuss that affects all of us. A phrase heavy with implication that transported me back through the years to our family dinners around the scarred oak table where he'd regale us with tales of his latest ventures, like that ill-fated foray into stocking electric vehicle conversion kits a few years back that promised big returns, but ended up buried under tariffs and supply chain snags. leaving the shop's books in a perpetual state of creative accounting that I had quietly helped balance during college breaks by crunching numbers on his ancient desktop computer, while Sarah flitted in and out with excuses about her part-time jobs at coffee shops that never lasted longer than a paycheck cycle. A sarcastic chuckle escaped me as I deleted the messages one by one, thinking how ironic it was that their sudden barrage of outreach came only after the hospital call exposed my vulnerability, yet conveniently timed with whatever fresh mess they had brewed up this time, because deep down I knew our family operated on a currency of convenience, where I was always the reliable safety net, the one who had covered tuition shortfalls back in the early 2000s when Dad's gambling habit resurfaced during a rough patch with the economy, forcing me to pick up extra shifts at the campus library just to avoid defaulting on loans that carried my name alone despite their assurances of co-signing support, while Sarah, ever the golden child in their eyes, skated through life with her charm offensives and half-baked schemes, like the time she convinced Mom to co-fund her boutique event planning business that folded after one disastrous wedding where the cake toppled into the punch bowl, leaving me to foot the bill for the damages out of guilt and habit without so much as a thank you card in return. The humor in it all bubbled up despite the tugging at my arm, imagining Sarah's perfectly filtered face crumpling if she realized her drama-free post had backfired into this silent standoff, her likes and shares now feeling as hollow as the promises she'd made when borrowing my car for that weekend getaway to Milwaukee 5 years ago, only to bring it back with a suspicious dent she dismissed as a rogue grocery cart in the parking lot, winking conspiratorially as if we were in on some sisterly joke that always ended with me cleaning up the aftermath. And in that reflective haze induced by the steady drip of pain relievers, I found myself scrolling idly through old photo albums on my phone to stave off the loneliness, pausing on images from Jake's 4th birthday party where the whole family had shown up for once, Dad manning the grill with his apron smeared in sauce and Mom fussing over the decorations. But even then the undercurrents of tension simmered beneath the surface, like the way Sarah had monopolized the conversation with stories of her latest boyfriend while I changed diapers and cut cake slices single-handedly after my then-husband bailed early for a work call. To shake off the melancholy, I texted Mia, my sharp-witted coworker from the agency who had become something of a lifeline in the office trenches, filling her in on the voicemail saga with a dash of self-deprecating wit about how my family reunions apparently required a near-death experience to even register on their radar. And she replied almost instantly with emojis of eye rolls and popcorn that made me snort laugh, her suggestion to channel the frustration into something proactive sparking an idea for a small act of revenge that felt more like poetic justice than outright malice. So together over a quick video call where she propped her phone against her coffee mug during her lunch break, we crafted an anonymous tip to the local Naperville community blog that specialized in neighborhood gossip and small-town scandals, phrasing it carefully as a concerned reader pointing out the irony of influencers promoting family harmony while ignoring real-life emergencies like a sibling's hospitalization, attaching a subtly cropped screenshot of Sarah's post that blurred the faces just enough to intrigue without doxing, and hitting send from a throwaway email account felt liberating in its clever subtlety, a way to poke at Sarah's carefully curated online persona without descending into the mudslinging she so often employed herself, the satisfaction warming me like a sip of contraband hot chocolate smuggled past the nurse's station. Mia signed off with encouragement to rest up and promises to handle the client follow-ups at work, leaving me alone once more with the hum of the air conditioning unit and my swirling thoughts, the uncertainty of their motives gnawing at the edges of my resolve as I pondered whether this outreach was born of genuine remorse or something more calculated, especially after Carla the nurse swung by for evening vitals and lingered a moment longer than usual, chatting idly about how she'd fielded a few more calls from what sounded like frantic relatives earlier in the day, dropping a casual hint overheard from the station about a local family business teetering on the brink of foreclosure due to mounting debts from poor investments, a detail that pinged uncomfortably close to Dad's shop troubles I dismissed as exaggeration during our last strained holiday call. making the pieces start to align in a way that suggested their desperation might run deeper than a simple check-in, the growing conflict twisting in my gut like over-tightened lug nuts on one of Dad's repair jobs. As night deepened and the hospital corridor quieted to a murmur of distant footsteps and paging beeps, I settled back against the pillows with the intention of powering down for real this time. But just then my phone buzzed sharply on the side table, the screen illuminating with a new text from Dad's number that cut through the dimness like a headlight's beam on a foggy highway, the message reading in stark letters, "We need you." Answer immediately, its urgency hanging in the air and freezing me in place with a fresh wave of apprehension about what exactly they required from the daughter they had so recently overlooked. Turning off my phone after reading that stark text from Dad felt like flipping the switch on a faulty circuit breaker in the middle of a summer storm, the kind that leaves you in sudden darkness, but with the distant rumble of thunder promising more trouble ahead. And I slid the device into the drawer of the nightstand with a deliberate motion that echoed my determination to reclaim some semblance of control amid the beeping monitors and the sterile hush of the hospital room where the air conditioner hummed relentlessly against the late afternoon heat seeping through the windows overlooking the bustling streets of Chicago, allowing myself a moment to exhale deeply as the screen went dark and the notifications ceased their insistent assault, though the weight of their implied desperation lingered in the air like the faint metallic tang of the four fluids still coursing through my veins to combat the lingering effects of my collapse. Isolation wrapped around me then in a way that amplified every small discomfort, from the scratchy sheets against my skin to the monotonous ticking of the wall clock marking hours that stretched interminably without the usual distractions of work emails or Jake's after-school chatter, forcing my thoughts to circle back to the patterns of our family life that had always positioned me as the emotional anchor, the one who absorbed the shocks from Dad's business missteps and Mom's quiet enabling without ever demanding reciprocity, a role that had intensified after my divorce when I moved back to the city proper to rebuild on my own terms while they remained ensconced in the suburban comfort of Naperville, occasionally summoning me for holidays that devolved into obligation rather than warmth. And in that solitude, doubt began to creep in about whether my silence was strength or just another form of self-imposed exile, the uncertainty gnawing at me as evening approached and the nursing staff shifted with their clipboards and quiet efficiencies. Relief came unexpectedly when a knock sounded at the door around dinner time, pulling me from my reverie to see Mia poking her head in with a conspiratorial smile, her arms laden with a takeout bag from that little Italian place near the office that served the best minestrone soup for when deadlines left no time for proper meals, and trailing behind her was Jake, my 8-year-old bundle of energy with his backpack slung over one shoulder and a fistful of construction paper drawings clutched in his small hands, his face breaking into a grin that lit up the room brighter than the overhead fluorescence as he scrambled onto the edge of the bed careful not to jostle the wires, chattering animatedly about his day at school where he'd scored a goal in recess soccer and learned about the water cycle in science class, the normalcy of his presence cutting through the tension like a warm breeze off Lake Michigan on a crisp fall day. We spent the next hour in a bubble of laughter and shared stories, Mia regaling us with exaggerated tales from the agency about the boss's latest meltdown over a misplaced flash drive that had everyone scrambling like chickens in a fox's yard. Her impressions so spot on that I found myself wheezing with genuine mirth despite the pull in my chest, and Jake adding his own embellishments with crayon sketches of superheroes battling villainous computers. The visit a welcome antidote to the day's heaviness until Mia gently steered the conversation toward the family drama after Jake stepped out to the hallway with a nurse for a quick snack, her eyes narrowing with that protective glint she always got when sensing injustice in my orbit, prompting me to spill more details about the voicemails and the barbecue post that had festered like an untreated splinter. In the vulnerability of the moment, with the soup warming my hands and Mia's steady gaze encouraging openness, I confessed a deeper secret I'd buried for years, the one from a desperate night. About 3 years back, when Jake came down with a brutal flu that spiked his fever to dangerous levels and landed us in the ER with bills piling up faster than the medical jargon. leading me in a haze of panic to forge a small check from Dad's shop account using details I'd glimpsed during a visit, rationalizing it as borrowing from the family pot since they'd never followed through on promises to help with emergencies. A choice that haunted my quieter moments because it blurred the lines between survival and dishonesty in a way that now, with their urgent pleas echoing in my mind, made me question if leveraging that knowledge for leverage would redeem or ruin me further. Mia's response a mix of empathy and caution, as she warned that dredging it up could unleash a backlash I wasn't ready for in my weakened state. Emboldened by the catharsis yet wrestling with the dilemma of whether to let sleeping dogs lie or use the truth as a weapon, I shifted gears toward a lighter form of retribution that felt wittier and less risky, pulling out the bedside tablet the hospital provided for patients and, with Mia's tech-savvy input, crafting an anonymous online retort on a forum thread linked to the Naperville blog where our earlier tip had gained traction, phrasing it as a satirical, open letter to drama-free families. That cleverly mirrored Sarah's caption by describing a hypothetical barbecue where the grill master flips burgers while flipping off real responsibilities like checking on hospitalized kin, the post laced with enough insider details about our old backyard setup, the rusted swing set and Mom's prized rosebushas to make it personal without being traceable. Exposing the hypocrisy in a way that would have Sarah scrolling in paranoia as comments rolled and questioning the authenticity of her bliss, the act of hitting publish sending a thrill through me like nailing a perfect pitch in a client meeting, satisfying that itch for payback with humor rather than vitriol and leaving me grinning at the screen even as Mia shook her head in amused disapproval. As the visit wound down with hugs from Jake, who promised to draw me a get-well card featuring me as an invincible warrior queen, and Mia slipping me a contraband candy bar for later, the room felt emptier in their absence. The growing conflict inside me intensifying as I debated the wisdom of my confessions and schemes, the pull toward helping despite the hurt clashing with a burgeoning resolve for boundaries that might finally free me from the cycle. A tension that built steadily until a soft knock interrupted the quiet once more, the door creaking open to reveal an unexpected visitor whose familiar face from the fringes of our family history sent a jolt of surprise through me. Standing there with an expression that blended concern and calculation in equal measure. Tom Riley's unexpected appearance in the doorway of my hospital room carried with it the faint scent of aftershave mixed with the musty aroma of old ledgers and coffee-stained desks from his accounting firm tucked away in the strip mall off Route 53 in Naperville. A figure from the periphery of our family lore who had always hovered on the edges of Dad's business dealings like a cautious shadow during those backyard strategy sessions where barbecue smoke mingled with talk of profit margins and risky loans, and as he stepped inside with a tentative nod, his rumpled suit jacket hanging loosely on his frame that had softened a bit since the last time I'd seen him at Jake's baptism over a decade ago, he clutched a styrofoam cup of vending machine coffee as if it were a talisman against the awkwardness of intruding on my recovery. Settling into the vinyl chair beside the bed with an apology for not calling ahead, but explaining that he'd heard about my collapse through the grapevine of mutual contacts at the shop and felt compelled to check in personally given our shared history of navigating Dad's financial tightropes. Conversation started haltingly with small talk about the weather turning crisp earlier than usual for late October in the Midwest and how Jake was faring in school from the snippets I'd shared on social media before the drama escalated. But Tom quickly steered toward the heart of his visit, his voice dropping to a confidential timbre as he leaned forward, revealing a twist that unraveled some of the fog around my family's sudden urgency by disclosing details from a recent audit he'd been roped into for Dad's auto repair business, uncovering layers of hidden debts stemming from a botched partnership on solar panel installations that had promised green energy subsidies, but delivered nothing but lawsuits and liens totaling tens of thousands of dollars. The kind of mounting pressure that explained the barrage of calls and texts without excusing their absence during my crisis, painting a picture of quiet desperation where the barbecue post was less a celebration and more a desperate veneer to mask the creditors circling like vultures over a stalled semi on the interstate. As he laid out the facts with the precision of someone who'd balanced too many precarious books over the years, mentioning how my name still lingered on an outdated co-signature from a business loan I'd reluctantly agreed to during a vulnerable post-divorce phase when they assured me it was just a formality. The conflict inside me swelled to a churning storm. Uncertainty about whether to extend a lifeline, despite the fresh sting of their neglect clashing with the ingrained pull of loyalty that had me calculating how much of my savings I could spare without jeopardizing Jake's college fund or my own precarious job security back at the agency, all while a wry humor surfaced in my response as I quipped that their idea of family support apparently involved turning me into an unwitting ATM after skipping the get-well flowers, the light vulgarity of calling it a half-baked bailout scheme. Drawing a reluctant chuckle from Tom, who admitted the irony wasn't lost on him amid Dad's stubborn refusal to downsize the shop despite the red ink bleeding through every statement. The impending revenge sharpened in that exchange, fueling a plan that felt cleverly calibrated to hit where it hurt without full exposure, prompting me to excuse myself briefly under the pretense of needing the restroom so I could grab the tablet and fire off a discreet message to a contact at one of the ad agencies where Sarah had been aggressively job hunting for months, subtly manipulating the narrative by forwarding an altered version of her resume that amplified her drama-free social media persona into a red flag for unreliability with fabricated notes about frequent, personal leaves tied to family upheavals. The sabotage witty in its subtlety, like slipping a whoopee cushion under the throne of someone who fancied themselves untouchable, designed to make her interviews fizzle with polite rejections that would leave her questioning her shine without ever tracing it back to my bedside machinations. A satisfying twist of the knife born from years of her coasting on charm while I bore the burdens. Yet, even as the digital deed was done, the deeper dilemma gnawed at me, Tom's earnest plea for me to consider talking things out with them stirring a disagreeable choice that I knew would raise eyebrows among anyone hearing the tale. Deciding in that moment to feign a complication in my recovery by requesting an extension on the monitoring from the on-call doctor during his evening rounds, exaggerating symptoms of lingering dizziness and fatigue with just enough authenticity drawn from my Rayall exhaustion to buy a few extra days in the hospital cocoon, a move that allowed more time to scheme and reflect but risked straining my professional relationships at work where Mia was already covering for me amid whispers of concern. The self-destructive edge of it making me pause because it prolonged my isolation from Jake and the normalcy I craved while feeding the cycle of resentment rather than breaking free. A calculation that felt empowering in the short term yet hollow in its potential to erode the independence I'd fought so hard to build after the divorce left me piecing together a life from the shards of shared dreams. Tom lingered a while longer, sharing anecdotes from the old days like the time Dad's shop fixed a celebrity's vintage Mustang for free just to get a shout-out that never materialized. His eyes searching mine for some sign of reconciliation before he rose to leave with vague assurances of keeping me posted on developments and a pat on my hand that carried the weight of unspoken regrets. The room falling back into its quiet rhythm as the door clicked shut behind him, leaving me to wrestle with the escalating tensions of debts and duties that blurred the lines between obligation and self-preservation in ways that left my resolve fraying at the edges. Hours slipped by in a blur of half-hearted attempts at the hospital's bland dinner tray and mindless flipping through channels on the TV mounted high on the wall, the growing atmosphere of uncertainty thickening like fog rolling in from the lake until my recharged phone, which I'd retrieved from the drawer against my better judgment, lit up with an incoming call from a blocked number that sent a chill racing down my spine, the ringtone slicing through the silence with insistent urgency and displaying no caller ID, but carrying an undercurrent of familiarity that made my finger hesitate over the answer button. The voice on the eventual voicemail, unmistakably Mom Linda's, laced with a tremor of desperation as she pleaded in cryptic terms for me to come home before everything unraveled beyond repair. Mom's voice on that voicemail, quivering with a raw edge I hadn't heard since the night Dad's shop nearly went under during the recession back in the late 2000s, pierced through the fortified silence I'd built around myself in the hospital room where the late-night hush amplified every creak of the building and distant murmur from the nurse's station. her words tumbling out in a rush about how things had spiraled far worse than anyone let on, with creditors hounding the family home and Sarah scrambling to cover her own mounting credit card debts from that failed jewelry line, pleading in that cryptic way for me to return to Naperville before the whole fragile structure collapsed like a house of cards in a stiff wind off the prairie. A message that hung in the air after I played it back twice more, each listen peeling back layers of the subtle clues Tom had dropped earlier about the solar panel fiasco and tying them to deeper family undercurrents I'd long suspected but never confronted, such as how my overlooked contributions over the years, from wiring emergency funds during Jake's medical scares to co-signing that old loan under duress, had quietly propped up their lifestyle while they painted me as the distant one in holiday cards and social media gloss. The pull of her desperation clashed violently with the fresh betrayal still smarting from their barbecue stunt, creating a dilemma that twisted my insides as I paced the limited confines of the room despite the doctor's orders for bed rest, debating whether answering would drag me back into the vortex of enabling or finally force the truths I'd skirted for decades, a choice that felt disagreeably tempting in its familiarity because part of me, the fixer ingrained from girlhood afternoons, balancing Dad's invoices on the kitchen table, itched to intervene even as my rational side screamed that this was the moment to sever the ties that had cost me so much emotional capital already. With the uncertainty coiling tighter than a spring in one of Dad's torque wrenches, I unblocked my phone fully and dialed her back in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, the call connecting after 3 rings to her tearful intake of breath that quickly dissolved into a flood of admissions about how the family day photo was a desperate bid to project stability amid the shop's foreclosure notices and Sarah's impulsive spending that had maxed out shared accounts without a whisper of accountability, revelations that partially illuminated the urgency of their pleas, but stopped short of full disclosure on how deeply my name was entangled in the financial web, her voice cracking as she confessed to skimming from family contributions, including a few of my past transfers to cover gambling relapses Dad had sworn off years ago, twists that hit like unexpected detours on the Kennedy Expressway during rush hour, forcing me to confront how their needs had always framed me as the perpetual savior while erasing my own crises from the narrative. Humor surfaced amid the tension as I quipped back that their version of support sounded like a bad insurance policy that only kicked in when the premiums were due, the light vulgarity of dubbing it a half-assed Hail Mary, drawing a watery laugh from her that eased the edge just enough for me to probe further, learning in halting details how Sarah's job hunt had hit snags likely from my subtle sabotage, leaving her panicking and contributing to the household strain, dilemmas piling on as I weighed offering tangible help against the risk of repeating the cycle that had left me depleted and alone after my divorce. Emotions churning in a way that would have anyone listening shaking their head at my wavering resolve, because extending even a tentative olive branch now, after their abandonment, smacked of self-sabotage wrapped in misplaced loyalty. The final confrontations unfolded in a cascade over the next day, starting with a video call from Dad that popped up unannounced while I picked at the hospital breakfast tray, his face lined with exhaustion against the backdrop of the cluttered shop garage, where tools lay scattered like forgotten promises. His gruff admissions confirming Mom's hints about the debts totaling over $50,000 from layered bad decisions, including that electric vehicle scheme and recent poker nights he'd hidden from everyone. Partial truths emerging that my cosign loan could indeed pull me under if they defaulted. A bombshell that ignited the impending revenge I'd been nurturing like a slow-burning fuse, leading me to craft the ultimate payback in a moment of calculated wit by accessing my banking app on the tablet and wiring an anonymous donation of $500 to the shop's hastily launched GoFundMe campaign that Sarah had posted online in a bid for community sympathy, attaching a note under a pseudonym reading, "For cutting the drama, real family support starts with honesty, not hashtags." The amount teasing relief without solving their woes and designed to string them along as donors and locals began questioning the vague story in comments that echoed the hypocrisies I'd exposed. A clever maneuver that turned their plea into a public spectacle, forcing awkward explanations and introspection without me ever showing my hand. the satisfaction blooming warm and wry as I imagined Sarah's frustration mounting with each notification while Dad puzzled over the ironic message. Twists continued to unfold in the ensuing texts and calls, Sarah's furious messages about weird contributions, hinting at her growing paranoia, and Mom's follow-up plea laced with hints of remorse for the barbecue oversight. Dilemmas forcing me to grapple with whether forgiving meant rebuilding on healthier terms or if vanishing into my Chicago life offered true freedom. The audience in my mind, the everyday folks juggling their own midlife strains, likely disagreeing with the softer leanings. That tempted me toward one last in-person talk, emotions peaking as the doctor finally cleared me for discharge mid-afternoon with prescriptions for rest and follow-up tests tucked into my discharge papers. Unhooking the machines that had tethered me for days like symbolic chains finally broken, leaving me standing at the window gazing out over the sprawling cityscape where the sun dipped low toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the high-rises and the distant shimmer of the lake. Phone in hand with their latest barrage of messages blinking insistently on the screen, the ambiguity settled over me like a fine mist, the major truths half revealed in their admissions, but leaving the core question of redemption unresolved. Would I power down for good and forge ahead unencumbered, or answer that final call and step back into the fray with boundaries redrawn, a thought-provoking precipice that hung in the balance as I gathered my things and headed toward the elevator, the future stretching out with as many unknowns as the winding roads leading back to Naperville or the open paths of independence I'd only just begun to claim.